Chapter 31, Kai Vu Village, Evil Retribution. Though everyone was staring at her, Delphine was no ordinary person. A chain of schemes flashed through her mind in an instant. She crossed her arms, leaned back against the chair, and looked at everyone with a provocative expression. "Are you sure you really want to hear this clue?" The bespectacled man, sensing something was off, asked cautiously. "Is this clue very special?" Delphine showed no fear at all. "Of course. Otherwise, I would have told you already. The hidden clues I know about Phuong Gak Tu and Phuong Thon Hall are somewhat dangerous. Anyone who learns them might encounter something unclean tonight." She lowered her voice as she spoke, her tone growing increasingly gloomy. A chilling smile crept onto her lips, making the three newcomers hesitate. If what she said was true, then her refusal to share the clue was understandable. At least, to some extent, it could even be seen as protecting them. Alice Englert looked at Delphine's provocative face. How could she not know what the woman was plotting? This cunning woman was simply trying to provoke her. In Delphine's imagination, the next development would be Alice Englert refusing to believe her, insisting on hearing the clue, then mysteriously dying that very night. That would prove Delphine's words true. The remaining three newcomers would not only feel grateful to her, but their trust would skyrocket, making them even easier to control, perhaps even turning them into her puppets. Of course, Alice Englert saw through all of this at a glance. She herself had passed through many blood gates and witnessed countless sinister schemes. She didn't even know how many people like Delphine she had encountered. Still, she chose to play along. "I'm not afraid. Go ahead and tell me the clue." Perfect timing, too. I can help everyone verify whether this so-called veteran who's cleared 5 blood gates is telling the truth. The members of the bespectacled man's team looked a little pleased. This woman wasn't bad at all. "Then thank you, Miss Alice." Alice Englert waved her hand. "No need." The three newcomers left the room. Delphine also called the girl who had been with her outside. Soon, only 4 people remained inside. At this point, Delphine calmly took a wooden tag out of her pocket and placed it on the table. When the three looked closely, it was indeed an identity tag engraved with the word Nguyen. "This is the clue I found." Alice Englert pretended to be surprised. "That's it?" Delphine nodded. "That's it." She had no intention of explaining anything further. She picked up the wooden tag, turned around, and left the room. In Delphine's eyes, Chris Hemsworth, Eric Church, and Alice Englert were already dead. Saying even one more word to them would be a waste of saliva. Only after Delphine had completely left did Eric Church curse under his breath. "Damn it, just looking at that woman's face makes me want to slap her twice." Alice Englert tapped the tabletop lightly with her pale fingers and smiled. "So do I. But there's no need to get angry at a dead person. She probably won't make it through tonight." Before long, night fell. Everyone stayed in their own rooms, pondering the clues to survival. In truth, most people couldn't think of anything at all, because from beginning to end, they had never obtained a truly useful clue. Outside the window, the moonlight was clear and cool. Yet when that light filtered through the glass into the room, it carried an indescribable chill. At some unknown moment, Chris Hemsworth, who was asleep, was awakened by a strange sound. He listened carefully and quickly realized, it was the sound of that terrifying charred ghost crawling across the ground from the previous night. Its fingernails scraping against the floor produced a shrill noise, stabbing into Chris Hemsworth's heart. The charred ghost didn't enter Chris Hemsworth's room. Instead, it crawled past his doorway, inch by inch, continuing forward. As the sound faded into the distance, Chris Hemsworth quietly got out of bed, cracked the door open, and carefully observed the thing crawling along the floor. Though the corridor was very dark, the moonlight shining in from the balcony allowed him to clearly see the pitch-black figure on the ground. It was a corpse with only its upper body left, burned completely into charcoal. The upper torso was small, probably that of a child. At its abdomen, the spine and internal organs dragged along the floor were still visible, but all of them were charred black. A scorching stench radiated from its body as it crawled forward using only its arms. Seeing this corpse, Chris Hemsworth suddenly recalled the annotation he had seen at Fukangak 2 during the day. It described how Niam 2's wife and son had been locked inside Yen Vu Temple. Later, during a thunderstorm, lightning struck the pavilion, setting it ablaze. Rain poured down, yet the fire could not be extinguished. Something suddenly clicked in his mind. He took out the memorial tablet he carried with him. Niam Shuyan. That's it. This must be Niam Shuyan, the son of Niam 2. Which means this so-called guesthouse is actually Yen Vu Temple, the one Niam 2's family built for the village. Realizing this truth made Chris Hemsworth's heart pound violently. These villagers of Kai Vu village actually dared to turn a haunted building into a guesthouse for outsiders like them to stay in. What, exactly were they trying to do? Why were they so eager for these outside visitors to die? Just as Chris Hemsworth was thinking, the sound of a door opening came from a room further down the corridor. Click. Not long after, a woman's terrified scream suddenly rang out from that room. No, it's not me. You've got the wrong person. That voice was all too familiar to Chris Hemsworth. It was Delphine. No one knew what she had encountered in her room, but her screams were especially miserable. Before long, they weakened, and from inside the room came the sound of chewing. Chris Hemsworth felt his scalp prickle. He quietly closed his door and climbed back onto his bed. Delphine's screams had been extremely loud. That night, no one on that floor managed to sleep. They curled up beneath their blankets, trembling. Only when dawn finally arrived did a despairing cry echo from the end of the corridor. Sister Delphine. Delphine. Chapter 32, Kai Vu Village, Exposed. Delphine's agonized screams from the previous night had echoed for a long time. Yet no one dared to go and check. No one knew what she had encountered inside that room. It was only after the morning sunlight finally shone into the guest house the next day, dispersing the oppressive Yin aura clinging to the building, that the girl Delphine had brought into the blood gate worked up the courage to carefully open Delphine's door and check on her condition. But one glance was all it took. The newcomer was so terrified that she wet herself on the spot. Normally, an adult psyche has a certain threshold of tolerance. Even when faced with bizarre and horrifying events, though lasting psychological trauma may remain, being scared to the point of losing control of one's bodily functions is extremely rare. Except for a very small number of people. Especially in the morning, when the bladder is already full. The girl's piercing cries drew everyone to Delphine's doorway. They cautiously looked inside and saw Delphine lying on the floor, her body twisted at an unnatural angle. Shredded flesh and fresh blood were scattered everywhere. She no longer looked human. Did you hear her screams last night? The bespectacled man asked in a trembling voice. Alice Englert looked at Delphine's corpse on the floor. There wasn't a trace of pity in her eyes. She screamed that loudly. Of course we heard her. Then why didn't anyone go save her? Then you heard her too, why didn't you go save her? I didn't dare. We're all newcomers. We don't have anything to protect ourselves. Alice Englert sneered. Protective items are extremely precious. Any ghost artifact brought out of a blood gate, whether strong or weak, has a limited number of uses, and absolutely never more than 3. Why should I waste something that valuable to save someone who has nothing to do with me? Everyone else followed suit. Only the girl collapsed on the floor continued to cry uncontrollably. The air was thick with the stench of blood, mixed with a faint smell of urine. This girl was named Jenny. She was a newcomer from Delphine's ghost house and seemed to have been close to Delphine. Now she was kneeling on the ground, crying in heartbreak. Seeing her pitiful state, Eric Church felt a twinge of sympathy and was about to step forward to comfort her. Unexpectedly, Jenny suddenly looked up and accused them angrily. You're all selfish. You clearly had protective items, yet you didn't save Sister Delphine. Well, now look what's happened. Sister Delphine is dead, there are no clues left. None of you will ever leave this place alive. Woo, woo, woo. Alice Englert crossed her arms and said indifferently. She's dead, yes, but that doesn't affect our search for a way out. Besides, your so-called senior, Delphine, was lying to everyone from the very beginning. And she definitely had more than one protective item. I'd guess she was simply too careless last night, she didn't even keep those items by her side. Knowing full well how dangerous this blood gate was and still acting so recklessly, she deserved to die. As soon as she finished speaking, the bespectacled man suddenly realized something and immediately asked. Alice Englert, you said Delphine was lying from the start, what do you mean by that? Alice Englert replied calmly. Some things are just conjecture. I won't say them. But I will tell you something I can clearly prove she lied about. That is, Delphine never went to Phuong Thon Hall. Don't be fooled by her aggressive bluster. As soon as she was just scaring us, Jenny, still kneeling on the floor, reacted as if her tail had been stepped on. That's nonsense. Sister Duong clearly went there. I went with her. She was desperate to clear this up, not to defend Delphine's reputation after death, but because Jenny knew that once everyone realized Delphine had never been to Phuong Thon Hall, then she herself, as Delphine's follower, obviously hadn't been there either. After that, she would likely face one of two outcomes. First, being abandoned by everyone, excluded from information about the survival route. Second, being forced to go alone to the remaining locations, gather clues, and share them with everyone. Originally, the second option wasn't unbearable. But after hearing Chris Hemsworth recount what they had encountered the previous night, Jenny was utterly terrified. Moreover, Delphine had previously hinted to her that those locations were extremely dangerous, likely hiding unclean things. Oh. You went with her? Are you sure? It had to be said, although Alice Englert was usually approachable, charming, and warm, once she changed her demeanor, the oppressive pressure she radiated was overwhelming. Just a simple question left Jenny speechless for a long while. After some time, Jenny forced herself to stiffen her reddened face and insisted stubbornly. I'm sure. Sister Duong definitely went there. Alice Englert shook her head. Lying without even blushing. I'm not lying. Fine. If you can answer one question of mine, you can prove you're not lying. What question? Alice Englert smiled seductively. None of us here has been to Phuong Thon Hall, so I won't ask you to describe what it looks like. After all, no one would know whether you were telling the truth. I'll just ask you one thing. You said you and Delphine went to Phuong Thon Hall, then tell everyone, when did you go? Hearing this question, Jenny felt her heart seize. It sounded like something she could answer casually. But in reality, she couldn't. This was their third day in the village. At noon on the second day, Delphine had sworn to everyone that they had already been to Phuong Thon Hall. In other words, the time Delphine supposedly went there could only have been before noon yesterday. Thinking this through, Jenny originally wanted to say they went in the morning. But then she suddenly remembered that Phuong Thon Hall seemed to be the farthest attraction from here, and she blurted out instinctively. We went on the afternoon of the first day. Right after entering this blood gate. It was around 3 in the afternoon. We thought it was still early, so we decided to go sightseeing, maybe we'd discover something. From that statement alone, everyone could basically tell, she was lying. Then when did you come back? Alice Englert sneered. Jenny swallowed hard. I forgot. It was already very late when we came back. I didn't pay attention to the time. Alice Englert pressed on, her voice now carrying a faint tremor of intensity. You didn't pay attention. You didn't even check the electronic watch on your wrist, the one with a luminous display. Jenny's entire body shook. Perhaps her emotions had finally reached their limit. She suddenly stood up, glaring at everyone in fury, almost screaming. I said we went to Phuong Thon Hall, on the afternoon of the first day. If you don't believe me, then forget it. What kind of skill is it for a bunch of people to gang up and bully a newcomer like me? With that, she shoved past the crowd and ran back to her room without looking back. Bang! The door slammed completely shut. Unconcerned. Alice, did we go too far? Eric Church whispered beside her. Though he hated evil like an enemy, he was unusually tolerant toward those he believed to be innocent. Alice Englert said coldly. When an avalanche falls, not a single snowflake is innocent. Delphine couldn't have told her the most important things, but she also couldn't have known nothing. She chose silence. She chose to sit by and watch all of this happen. Do you really think she's a good person? Eric Church fell silent. This woman, Jenny, may be timid, but she's also meticulous. If she had the ability and the courage, she might have gone even further than Delphine. After saying this, Alice Englert suddenly yawned. I'm sleepy. I'm going back to take care of my skin. Last night was truly troublesome. Ghosts crying in the middle of the night makes it impossible to sleep properly. Chapter 33, Kai Vu Village, the Evil One in Hiding. Ghost artifacts were gifts bestowed by the Blood Gate upon those who entered its trials. For that very reason, they were absolutely personal. Within the same Blood Gate, one could lend a ghost artifact to another, but never give it away. And once the owner of a ghost artifact died, all of their artifacts would be sealed, reduced to the most ordinary of objects. After everyone had left, the newcomer named Jenny cautiously opened the door to her room. Gritting her teeth, suppressing the terror clawing at her heart, she stepped into Delphine's room. She didn't dare look at the grotesque corpse sprawled on the floor. Trembling, she rummaged through the room. In the end, she found 3 ghost artifacts inside Delphine's backpack. She knew the rules perfectly well, yet she still took the 3 artifacts and put them away. Who knew whether they might still work? What if they could be useful? When a person is desperate, they will cling to even the faintest glimmer of light. Jenny was no exception. But just as she stowed the 3 ghost artifacts into her own bag and turned to leave, she suddenly froze. Utter horror flooded her eyes as she stared at the floor before her, her body shaking violently. The blood-soaked corpse that had been there moments ago, was gone. Not only the body, even the bloodstains on the floor had vanished. As if, no one named Delphine had ever existed in this room. Cold dread surged up Jenny's spine. She felt a chill at her back, as though the dead Delphine were watching her from somewhere unseen. Without daring to turn around, she bolted out of the room, ran back to her own quarters, and locked the door from the inside. Around 10 in the morning, the 3 bespectacled men went out again in search of new clues. Alice Englert, who had been actively investigating, had only just woken up and finished washing her chair and sat in the open space, basking in the sunlight. He didn't seem to be in a hurry at all. Neither of them were in a hurry. Eric Church was. "Bro, what's going on with you two?" he asked anxiously. "Aren't we going to look for clues this morning?" Chris Hemsworth didn't turn around. He rocked gently in the chair, frowning as though deep in thought. "Clues," he said calmly. "What clues are left to find?" Eric Church strode over in front of him. "Don't we still have one tourist site we haven't visited? That place could hold an important clue." Chris Hemsworth shook his head. "Useless." Eric Church didn't understand. He let out a confused sound and was about to press further when Alice Englert's voice came from behind him. "We already have the clues we need. Continuing to risk our lives will only show us more lies fabricated by the villagers." Seeing his confusion, she continued. "These tourist sites were built by the villagers. They are exactly what the villagers want us to see. Trying to uncover the truth from them is fundamentally impossible." Eric Church grew uneasy. "Then what do we do? We can't just sit here and wait to die." There are less than 5 days left before the temple sacrifice begins. Seeing his agitation, Alice Englert let out a soft sigh. I know you're anxious. But don't be. Anxiety is useless. At that moment, Chris Hemsworth, still sitting in the sunlight, asked the question he had posed earlier. Tell me, what role do the people of the Nguyen clan, mentioned in the Blood Gates hint, really play? Were they kind-hearted people whose heads were severed? Or, were they innocent people yearning for peace and sweet dew? Both of them sensed the deeper meaning in his words. Alice Englert vaguely grasped something and looked up at him. Chris, what do you think? This time, Chris Hemsworth turned his head. His gaze was sharp, lucid, unlike anything before. The answer is, neither. Both of them stiffened. Neither? Chris Hemsworth said slowly. At first, I didn't understand the hint given to us by the Blood Gate. But now, I more or less do. Pay attention to the order of that hint. Kind-hearted people are drained of blood and turned into sweet dew. Compassionate people are beheaded and granted peace. If that's the case, why would the innocent still be waiting for sweet dew and peace? At those words, realization struck them like a blow. Chris Hemsworth continued. Because they received no sweet dew from the kind-hearted, and no peace from the compassionate. And among them, there is an evil one. He caused the kind-hearted to be drained dry, the compassionate to lose their heads, and left the innocent, with nothing at all. By the time he finished speaking, both of them felt their breathing grow rapid. Bro, Eric Church said tensely, are you saying that spirit medium Nguyen, the village shaman, is that evil one? But why would she do that? It makes no sense. They're all from the same village. There's no deep hatred could make sense of it. Alice Englert let out a cold laugh and said something that sent a chill straight through his bones. How does a village shaman establish her status? Of course, by turning the entire village into something haunted. Boom! It was as if thunder had struck. Eric Church stood frozen, eyes wide. This. Seeing his disbelief, Alice Englert sneered. Sometimes, humans are far more terrifying than ghosts. After a moment of silence, Chris Hemsworth spoke again. Yesterday, when I asked the aunt selling meals in the cafeteria about the building structure, her eyes avoided mine. She definitely knows something. But when I went back this morning, she wasn't there. The cafeteria staff said she comes at noon. We still have time. Let's wait. At noon, I want to speak with her alone, and bring Nguyen Shuyan's memorial tablet. The two of them nodded lightly. If they could hear the truth directly from someone who knew what had happened, that would be best. At noon, the three of them entered the cafeteria. But when Chris Hemsworth saw the woman selling meals, he frowned. This person was not the one from yesterday. A vague sense of unease rose in his chest. Excuse me, he asked softly, why isn't the woman who sold meals yesterday here today? The old man at the stall squinted for a long moment before understanding the question. Oh, her. She doesn't seem to be feeling well. Chapter 34, Kai Vu Village, Making Inquiries. She's not well, does that mean she's sick? The old man scooping rice shook his head. I'm not sure. I didn't ask in detail. Probably just a minor illness. Medical conditions in the village aren't good, and there's a bit of Yin presence here. An occasional headache is normal. Hearing this, Chris Hemsworth asked the old man for the woman's address. After getting the information he needed, he carried his tray back to Alice Englert and Eric Church's room. Well? Eric Church asked while eating. How did it go? She didn't come. They said she isn't well, Chris Hemsworth replied. But I don't think it's that simple. After we finish eating, let's go to her house and take a look. Both of them nodded. After the meal, they followed the directions given by the old man and headed into the part of the village where the villagers lived. In truth, this was their first time coming here. The tourist sites, the guest house, and the village itself were completely different worlds. The former two had exquisitely crafted architecture, the village, however, looked stark and desolate, the living conditions plainly poor. Judging by the tourist sites alone, the three of them had initially assumed the villagers were fairly well off, living comfortable lives. But the scene before them was nothing like what they had imagined. The ground was packed mud and gravel. Most of the homes were thatched huts, many without brick walls at all. Looking around, there was nothing but decay. "Damn it, how can it be this run down?" Eric Church muttered. Even he sensed something was deeply wrong. They walked along the dirt road. From time to time, villagers passed by, and those busy in their courtyards all cast strange looks at the three of them. It was a peculiar kind of indefinable guilt, and a murky, oppressive gloom. Without exception, these villagers only stole glances at them. No one dared look directly at them, let alone meet their eyes. "These people really do have ghosts in their hearts," Chris Hemsworth sneered. Before long, they arrived at the address of the woman who had served food in the cafeteria the day before. As they pushed open the creaking old gate and stepped into the courtyard, they happened to run into a middle-aged man coming out of the house. He was carrying a basin of water, with a towel draped over his arm. The moment he saw them, the man's expression changed abruptly, first a flash of startled fear, then a forced suppression of it. "Who are you? What are you doing in my house?" he asked, his voice low, carrying a faint hostility. Chris Hemsworth spoke calmly. "We're here to see Milan." Milan was the name of the woman who had served food the previous day. The middle-aged man's face turned cold. "You've got the wrong place. There's no one named Milan here." With that, he moved to drive them out. Just as Chris Hemsworth was weighing whether to force his way in, Alice Englert suddenly spoke from beside him. "You'd better not stop us. To be honest, it's not us who want to see Milan, it's someone you absolutely cannot afford to offend." The middle-aged man froze mid-motion. Alice Englert swayed forward, unhurried, stopping in front of him. She leaned in and whispered a name. The instant he heard it, the man's face went deathly pale. He staggered back 2 steps, cold sweat beading on his forehead. "Don't believe me?" Alice Englert smiled without warmth. "Do you want us to take that out? It's in his hands." Her gloomy voice was like a winter wind, icy and piercing. The man shuddered violently and shook his head in panic. "No, no need. Milan is my wife. She's not feeling well today, so I don't want her meeting strangers. Relax. Debts have their owners, grudges their targets. We're not here to seek revenge. We just want to confirm something with her. Once we're done asking, we'll leave." The middle-aged man immediately poured out the water from the basin, set it on the stone ledge, and led them inside. The room was even more dilapidated than the courtyard outside, as if it hadn't been cleaned in years. Many of the furnishings bore deep marks of time, giving the impression that the house had been built decades ago, and never updated since. A short, plump middle-aged woman lay on the bed, wrapped tightly in blankets, her lips pale. Her eyes were shut, as though she were asleep. Alice Englert stepped forward and placed a hand on the woman's forehead. She had a fever. And a high one, over 39 degrees. Perhaps the movement of the three of them disturbed her. Milan suddenly opened her eyes and screamed. When did you come into my house?" Chris Hemsworth signaled for Eric Church to close the door. With a creak, the door shut, plunging the room into gloom. Click. He pulled the hanging light. The dim illumination washed over them, inadvertently lending their figures a ghostly edge. "I have a few questions to ask you," Chris Hemsworth said evenly. "Once I'm done, we'll leave." Seeming to recognize his face, Milan's expression softened a little. She no longer looked as panicked as before. However, the moment Chris Hemsworth asked his next question, her body beneath the blanket tensed violently. "Why did you clean up a haunted house for outsiders like us to stay in?" Milan stammered, her face drained of color. What haunted house? I don't know what you're talking about. Chris Hemsworth looked straight into her eyes and suddenly smiled. The building you cleaned up, was it the ruins of Nguyen? Milan began to shake uncontrollably. The middle-aged man beside her sensed something was wrong and moved to intervene, but then saw Chris Hemsworth suddenly pull something from his chest and place it before him. The instant he recognized it, the man let out a shrill scream, clutched his head, and dropped to his knees, trembling violently. As if possessed, he babbled non-stop. "It wasn't us, we didn't do it, don't come looking for us." The object in Chris Hemsworth's hand was Nguyen's memorial tablet. Chapter 35, Kai Vu Village, the spirit medium Nguyen. "I have only one question," Chris Hemsworth said, staring fixedly at the woman on the bed, his gaze never wavering. "Why did you clean up such a haunted building and let outsiders like us stay there?" Milan bit her lip, clearly determined to keep silent. But the moment her eyes fell on the memorial tablet in Chris Hemsworth's hand, her entire body began to tremble violently. It wasn't our idea." Her voice was filled with regret and helplessness. "We didn't want this either. But the temple's sacrifice is about to begin. If we don't make all the preparations..." Before she could finish, the middle-aged man in the room suddenly shouted. "Milan! Shut up! Do you want to die? How can you say something like that?" The three of them were startled by his sudden roar. They turned to look at him, his eyes were bloodshot, his mental state clearly unstable. "It can't be said. This matter, it absolutely cannot be spoken of. If the spirit medium finds out, we're finished." At the mention of the spirit medium, the middle-aged man seemed to touch a taboo. Terror surged through him, and he looked on the verge of collapse. Milan, who had been about to confess everything to Chris Hemsworth, seemed to be jolted awake by her husband's shout. She clenched her lips tightly and fell silent. The atmosphere in the room grew tense once more. At that moment, Alice Englert, who had been calmly standing beside Chris Hemsworth, suddenly pulled a sharp dagger from her pocket. A name was engraved on the blade, Sun Tri. "I've killed enough people in the outside world already," she said softly. "So, after entering the blood gate, I don't really enjoy killing ordinary people anymore." Her voice turned unnaturally cold, completely different from her usual lazy tone. Aura burst from her, filling the entire room. Even Chris Hemsworth and Eric Church beside her felt their hearts jolt. "If we don't uncover the truth, all of us will die. In that case, before dying, we might as well kill a few more people, to make it worth it." With that, she gripped the dagger and stepped toward the middle-aged man, one step at a time. The man grabbed a wooden stool beside him, intending to strike back, but he had clearly underestimated Alice Englert. With a slight tilt of her body, she dodged effortlessly. In the next instant, the icy blade was already pressed against the man's throat, forcing him flat onto the ground. The chilling sensation of death at close range snapped the middle-aged man back to his senses. He didn't dare move. Chris Hemsworth and Eric Church stared wide-eyed. "Damn, you can do that? Just use force to control an NPC inside the blood gate?" "Let me tell you," Alice Englert said coldly. "This cut avoids your artery, but if I so much as twitch my hand, you'll be dead. Do you understand?" At this moment, her seductive beauty fused completely with icy cruelty. She was like a demon, straddling the man's body. The scene should have been provocative, but the cold blade in her hand erased any impure thoughts entirely. Under the threat of death, the middle-aged man nodded frantically, trembling. He didn't dare struggle, the dagger was still pressed to his neck. "Now," Alice Englert said, "answer the question we asked earlier." The man shut his eyes tightly. After hesitating for a long time, he finally spoke in a hoarse voice. "I can tell you the truth, but you must never tell anyone else." A beautiful smile. In an instant, the icy expression from before melted into gentleness. "Don't worry. We won't tell anyone. But we already know quite a few things. If we find out you're lying, You know what will happen. With that, she withdrew the dagger and casually wiped the blood from its blade. The wound on the man's neck wasn't deep and hadn't damaged the main artery. It bled a little, then stopped. He let out a long breath. Clearly, he understood that if he didn't give them a satisfactory answer today, neither he nor his wife would survive. This happened a very long time ago. We don't know all the details. Simply put, every year, the village must hold a temple sacrifice. And the offering is a human being. At the words human offering, the three of them, despite having prepared themselves, still felt a chill run through them. Who do you sacrifice? Chris Hemsworth asked. The middle-aged man's face darkened. Those, who died 100 years ago. Why sacrifice them? I don't know. The spirit medium Nguyen has always handled this matter. We only provide the offerings according to her instructions. As for the rest, we don't ask. At this point, Chris Hemsworth suddenly asked an odd question. Why is the village so silent? After a long while, he finally spoke. Every year, each household in the village must sell off most of its grain and meat, in exchange for money to build the mountain god temple and the earth god temple. Only then will we have favorable weather the following year. Hearing this, Chris Hemsworth suddenly smiled. And all of this was arranged by the spirit medium? The middle-aged man nodded. Yes. Thanks to the spirit medium, Kaivu village can live in peace. It's for the common good, we have no reason to refuse. Even if we're poor, at least, everyone can survive safely. Chris Hemsworth thought for a moment, then raised one finger. One last question. After that, we'll leave. The middle-aged man nodded repeatedly. All right. Chris Hemsworth asked. Back then, the family of Nguyen too, how exactly did they die? Before the man could answer, an aged, unfamiliar, chilling voice suddenly echoed from outside the room. 100 years ago, during the Great Famine, Nguyen Tu's family not only hoarded grain, but murdered villagers who came to borrow food, some were even eaten by them. Relying on the Yen Vu temple, that household oppressed the common people daily, plundering wealth without restraint. When villagers' lives hung by a thread, he sowed endless resentment, leaving the village starving, corpses everywhere. Fortunately, my ancestor, Nguyen Kai Hong, rose up and led the villagers to storm Nguyen Tu's house, finally putting an end to his monstrous crimes. As the voice fell silent, all 5 people in the room tensed instantly. Especially the middle-aged couple, both of them trembled violently, faces drained of all color, not a trace of blood left. Chapter 36, Kai Vu Village, Speculation. The aged voice rang out, catching everyone off guard. Though they were hearing it for the first time, Chris Hemsworth and the other 2 could almost immediately confirm. That voice belonged to the spirit medium Nguyen from the village. Before the person even appeared, a terrifying pressure pierced through the old wooden door and crashed into the room. Moments later, the door was pushed open. The withered face of the spirit medium Nguyen revealed itself. At the sight of that face, the middle-aged man in the room collapsed to the floor as if all strength had drained from his body. His eyes turned hollow. He knew it was over for him. He had no idea how long the medium had been standing outside, how much she had overheard. If she had heard what they were just talking about. Fear and despair flooded his heart. He knew her methods well. He dared not imagine the horrors that were about to unfold. There's a guest house in the village specifically for tourists. The medium said kindly with a warm smile. So why did the 3 of you suddenly come into the village? She leaned on a dragon-headed cane. At her waist hung a special wooden plaque. The 3 of them had seen that plaque many times, it was the identity token of the Nguyen clan. It's nothing serious, Chris Hemsworth replied calmly, without the slightest trace of guilt. We just noticed the cook at the eatery had changed, so we casually asked about it. We heard she wasn't feeling well. I study medicine, so I came by to check. He wasn't lying. Every word was the truth. The medium cast a sideways glance at Chris Hemsworth. Her gaze was probing, like a wolf in the forest sizing up its prey. Chris Hemsworth keenly noticed, near her shoulder, on her neck, there was a patch of reddened skin. Though her clothing was fairly conservative, the redness could still be faintly seen, like a ring of boils encircling her neck. It almost looked like a ring of bloodstains around her throat. There may be no doctors in this village, the medium said slowly. But we have our own ways of treating illness. There's no need to trouble you, sir. With that, she walked unhurriedly to the woman lying on the bed. Her eyes were cold, as if she were looking at a corpse. The medium raised her wrinkled hand toward the woman. At that moment, the man in the room suddenly went mad, lunging forward to clutch the medium's legs, begging desperately. Please, have mercy, Madam Medium, have mercy. Please spare her life. Milan just has a fever, her brain's been burned by it. She hasn't said anything. It was me who spoke, it was me. Please, spare her. He pleaded and kowtowed repeatedly. Yet the medium remained indifferent. I heard the villagers say strangers had entered the village, so I came to take a look. She said calmly. Your wife merely has a fever. Perhaps she's possessed. I'll take a look at her. What? Don't you want your wife to recover? Her aged voice carried a clear note of threat. The man hesitated, looking at his trembling wife on the bed. After a long silence, he finally released his grip. The medium stretched out her wrinkled fingers, grasped at the air, muttering something under her breath, then flicked it toward the woman's face. She looked like a quack healer, but everyone saw it clearly. After she did this, the woman who had been shaking violently suddenly grew still. The fear vanished from her face, replaced by a strange smile. Her eyes turned empty. All right, the medium said. Your wife is cured. She seemed slightly fatigued. Her tone carried a hint of provocation as she looked at Chris Hemsworth, as if asking. Can your medical skills achieve something like this? Chris Hemsworth smiled. You truly are remarkable, Madam Medium. Today has broadened our horizons. Since Milan is fine now, we won't disturb you any further. Watching the three of them leave the room and head toward the outskirts of the village. Under her unblinking stare, all three felt a chill crawl up their spines, an overwhelming discomfort. When they had gone far enough, the wooden door before her slowly closed. Inside the dark room, the middle-aged man's terrified, despairing eyes were also sealed away behind that old wooden door. Damn it, that old woman is terrifying. Eric Church shuddered as they walked, trying to shake off the lingering chill. Back in the room, when the medium glanced at him, it felt like needles stabbing into his back. Alice, you're so skilled, why didn't you make a move just now? You could have tied her up and dragged her straight to Phuong Thon Hall. That female ghost will definitely come looking for this medium. If we let it take revenge, maybe we'll uncover the truth, and a way out. Alice Englert sheathed her blade, returning to her usual lazy demeanor. There's a saying, she said. Martial skill cannot contend with immortal arts. I may have a few tricks, she continued. But they're limited to physical combat. Against someone cultivating unorthodox evil ways methods, I'm helpless. Chris Hemsworth spoke up. That medium is truly strange. And she doesn't seem well herself. Not only does she have rashes, but she also gives off a peculiar fragrance. Alice Englert frowned. You smelled it too. I thought I was hallucinating. Chris Hemsworth nodded. I smelled it as well. The villagers here seem extremely afraid of Nguyen, even though he's already dead. But with a medium like that in the village, there shouldn't be ghost trouble, at least not frequently. If you think about it that way, there's only one possibility. The two of them turned to look at Chris Hemsworth. He said slowly, what is it? The villagers of Kai Vu village must have done something wrong to Nguyen's family. Their guilt has turned into fear. But the Nguyen family died 100 years ago. Back then, when Nguyen Kai Hong led people to kill them, these villagers surely didn't participate. Most of these people likely know the truth of that year, but they concealed it, perhaps even twisted it. Do you remember the places we passed? Nearly all of them had explanations about the Great Famine back then, praising Nguyen Kai Huang's contributions and condemning the crimes of the Nguyen family. But the truth may be completely the opposite. When Chris Hemsworth finished speaking, the three of them fell silent. At that moment, Eric Church, walking beside them, suddenly asked. But if the Nguyen family committed no crimes, then why did the villagers rush into their home and kill them? After that question, all three stopped in their tracks. A moment later, they snapped their heads up, fear of an indescribable kind appearing in their eyes. Could it be the food? Chapter 37, Kai Vu Village, Speculation on the Path of Survival. Once a terrifying thought takes root and begins to sprout in the mind, it is almost impossible to erase. The food. Those two words hovered before the three of them, impossible to drive away. No way. Even for food, it wouldn't come to killing people, right? Eric Church took a deep breath. What truly frightened him was not the act of murder itself, but the reason the villagers had slaughtered Niam Tu's entire family, all for a little food. This isn't the first time something like this has happened. In ancient times, when great famine struck, some people even treated their own children as food. Many believe these are exaggerated descriptions, but in reality, they are not exaggerated at all. Chris Hemsworth spoke in a heavy voice. Of course, that's not the most terrifying part. After all, in such circumstances, humans ultimately can only follow the law of the strong preying on the weak in order to survive. What's truly terrifying is that those who commit evil, after surviving the hardship, then use lies to cover up their crimes, even shifting the blame onto the victims. Back then, what was taken from Niam Tu's family wasn't just their food, but also their lives and their dignity. Alice Englert also let out a sorrowful sigh. This is the most frightening thing of all. Everyone knew he was innocent, yet no one stood up to speak for him. They even banded together, fabricating monstrous crimes for him, pointing fingers at him, judging him. I think I can more or less understand now why such a terrifying vengeful ghost was born in this village. This is no longer a simple matter of life and death grudges. The three of them felt a heavy weight in their hearts. No one spoke further as they returned in silence to their guest house. They could more or less guess what had happened in the village back then, yet they still had not found any way out. Time passed quickly, and soon it was dinner again. Because everyone had been cautious, aside from Delphine, the number of people had not continued to decrease. 7 remained. During the meal, everyone sitting at the table was silent. Only Jenny stared at her own place setting, smiling the whole time. Her smile was strange, her expression vacant, as if no one knew what she had experienced alone in the guesthouse at noon. Chris Hemsworth studied Jenny. He kept feeling that this smile was familiar, yet he couldn't recall why. The others noticed it as well and quietly moved a little farther away from her. As a result, a very bizarre scene appeared at the round dining table. Jenny sat alone, with no one on either side, while the other 6 crowded together on one side. Jenny, what are you smiling about? Finally, someone couldn't hold back and spoke. It was Irma, the timid girl. She was frightened by the way Jenny looked. But Jenny paid her no attention at all. She held her chopsticks without picking up any food, just staring at the plate in front of her, occasionally letting out soft chuckles, as if someone beside her were telling jokes, amusing her. The scene was truly eerie. Irma felt that if there weren't so many people in the room, she would have run out immediately without looking back. What on earth happened to her? The bespectacled man was also terrified. Yet no one answered his question, because no one knew. Chris Hemsworth kept his head down eating, but from time to time he looked up, carefully observing Jenny, as if examining something. Until a certain moment, when he suddenly stopped moving his chopsticks. He remembered. He finally remembered why Jenny's smile felt so familiar. Because not long ago, he had seen the same smile on Milan's face. The spirit medium woman had approached the bedridden Milan, chanting some kind of incantation, waving something in her hands, and then Milan had smiled like this. Could it be the spirit medium woman's doing? What was she trying to do? Just as Chris Hemsworth was deep in thought, Jenny suddenly stood up and staggered toward the door. Her way of walking was like a soulless corpse, devoid of any vitality. Yet no one in the room dared to stop her. Only after she had gone far away did Irma speak weakly. Are we going to die? Her voice carried confusion and choking sobs. There are only 4 days left. We've basically visited all the places we can visit, found all the clues we can find, but we still haven't found where the way out is. This door, does it actually have no exit at all? Under immense pressure, a person's emotions will collapse first. And once emotions collapse, intelligence is the next to suffer. People in such a state constantly doubt themselves, doubt everything around them. Hey, Alice Englert, have you found any useful clues? Just tell us. We can all think it through together, it's better than fighting alone. After all, right now we're grasshoppers tied to the same rope. The bespectacled man, though a newcomer and not very impressive in many ways, still inspired a great deal of confidence in the group with his initiative in seeking a way out. All right. We really have found some useful clues. Right now, there are 7 of us left, no, to be precise, 6. So I'll share what we've learned. Alice Englert spoke softly. She first told everyone about the famine that had struck the village 100 years ago, then mentioned the hints given by the Blood Gate. The hints of the Blood Gate are usually incomplete. In fact, besides the kind-hearted person, the compassionate person, and the innocent person, there is also an evildoer in this village. And that evildoer is the village's medium. As for our speculation about the path of survival, we need to help the kind-hearted person take revenge, eliminate the evildoer, help the compassionate person recover the head they lost and restore peace to the village. And we have less than 4 days left to complete all of this. If, before the sacrificial ritual at the shrine, we fail to finish these tasks, then what we will face at that time will very likely be the final reckoning of the kind-hearted person and the compassionate person. Chapter 38, Kai Vu Village, A Terrifying Truth. Hey! If that's the case, then we missed a perfect opportunity. The bespectacled man ground his teeth and clapped his hands together. This afternoon, the spirit medium Nguyen came to the guest house once. If we'd known earlier, we should have tied her up. Chris Hemsworth replied calmly. You shouldn't feel regret, you should feel lucky. If you'd known all this at the time and made a move on the spirit medium Nguyen, then the one who ended up in trouble would very likely have been you. He recounted to everyone what had happened in the village that afternoon. Only then did they understand why Jenny had become the way she was. It was undoubtedly the spirit medium Nguyen's doing. Why did she turn Jenny into that? After hearing about Granny Nguyen's uncanny abilities, the bespectacled man, who had moments ago regretted not acting, now felt a chill crawl up his spine. If they had returned a little earlier, perhaps they too would have been harmed by Granny Nguyen, becoming soulless shells just like Jenny. I think it might be related to Delphine's death. Alice Englert said. At first, Delphine was a pawn in Granny Nguyen's hands, used to mislead us and guide us into doing certain things. Now that this pawn is gone, she naturally has to take matters into her own hands. As she spoke, Chris Hemsworth suddenly understood something. His voice carried a trace of excitement. I finally get it, this is the key to everything. Everyone immediately turned to look at him, faces filled with confusion and curiosity. Bro, what do you know now? Chris Hemsworth slowly uttered a sentence that sent goosebumps racing across their skin. From the moment we entered the Blood Gate, we were already being deceived. The sacrificial ritual at the shrine doesn't start 4 days from now. In fact, from the day we arrived, the ritual had already begun. The moment his words fell, the entire room sank into deathly silence. Do you remember the mission given by the Blood Gate? The mission was for us to survive the shrine ritual on the 7th day. That doesn't mean the ritual only starts on the 7th day. As for what we're experiencing right now. Chris Hemsworth spoke faster and faster, his thoughts growing increasingly clear. At the beginning, the medium contacted Delphine, promising him survival while having him cooperate with her to lead us to our deaths. Those who secretly went up the mountain under Delphine's guidance, visiting various sites, this was all calculated by the medium from the start. In our eyes, these locations might contain clues to the path of survival, but in the medium's eyes, they were also places to offer up sacrifices. Phuong Thon Hall, Phu Kangak Tu Shrine, Bat Hak Well, even the guest house we're staying in, Yen Vu Temple, each of them harbors terrifying vengeful ghosts. The villagers here, from the moment we stepped into the village, have been doing everything they could to sacrifice us to the dead. That's why, after Delphine died, the medium guessed that some of us had already discovered the truth. So instead of looking for another inside accomplice, she chose to act personally. As Chris Hemsworth revealed the truth piece by piece, everyone felt a bone-deep chill. The ritual, so it started long ago. The bespectacled man muttered. Following Chris Hemsworth's reasoning, they suddenly recalled an obvious fact that had been happening all along, yet they had overlooked it. Someone died every single day. They were sacrifices. That's right. And the ritual hadn't started yet. Would the villagers and the medium really have let them die so casually? Obviously not. The room was completely silent. No one spoke. They had believed the ritual would begin in 4 days, only to realize it had already started 2 days ago. Damn it! We should have figured this out sooner. The bespectacled man couldn't help but curse. At that moment, Alice Englert finished her meal and set down her chopsticks. All right. It's late today, no one go out anymore. The village is already unsafe, and when you return to your rooms, check every corner carefully. If you see a wooden plaque with the character Nguyen on it, throw it away immediately. With heavy hearts, everyone returned to their rooms. Chris Hemsworth checked his room thoroughly, making sure nothing was overlooked, then locked the door. Night fell quickly over the village. Before long, it was pitch black outside. Chris Hemsworth's mind was still somewhat tangled as he sat on the bed, sorting through his thoughts. Although we've roughly figured out what happened back then, many details are still unclear, the deaths of Nguyen Tu's family, and why the Compassionate One was a monk. But now that the medium is highly alert to us, investigating everything bit by bit will be extremely difficult. Most of the village's current population was under 70 years old. Chris Hemsworth had noticed this as soon as they arrived. In fact, given the village's medical conditions, the fact that these villagers could live past 60 was largely thanks to burning incense and praying for blessings. That meant the surviving villagers couldn't possibly know everything about what had happened 100 years ago. Perhaps they truly weren't clear about some of the smaller details, perhaps they had only heard the elders speak of certain major events and knew that Nguyen Tu's family had been wronged. It seems the breakthrough point is still the medium. Chris Hemsworth's gaze sharpened. Although they didn't want to confront her directly, it now seemed unavoidable. Because there was no wooden plaque in the room, no one encountered Yen Chuan that night. Perhaps driven by hatred, it seemed uninterested in them, focusing only on searching for wooden plaques bearing the character Nguyen. The next morning, as Chris Hemsworth sat down for breakfast, he discovered Alice Englert was gone. Chapter 39, Kai Vu Village, The Bronze Mirror. That's right, Alice Englert was gone. Early in the morning, Chris Hemsworth and Eric Church went to knock on Alice Englert's door, but no one answered. Finding this strange, they thought she might have woken up early and gone to breakfast. Yet when they reached the dining hall, there was still no sign of her. Chris Hemsworth asked the staff, but they all said they hadn't seen Alice Englert. Unease began to creep in. The two hurried back to the guest house and stopped in front of Alice Englert's door. Chris Hemsworth gently turned the doorknob. The door wasn't locked and opened right away. No one was inside. The faint scent of Alice Englert's shampoo still lingered in the room. Damn it! Eric Church muttered. Could something have happened to Sister Alice? Chris Hemsworth searched the room carefully, then shook his head, his expression heavy. There are no signs of a struggle or resistance. And she took her backpack with her. Judging by these details, Sister Alice probably left the room on her own. Eric Church frowned. Left on her own? Chris Hemsworth nodded. Yes. Sister Alice isn't impulsive. She must have discovered something extremely important. Even so, Chris Hemsworth couldn't feel at ease. Although it was clear that Alice Englert had left of her own accord, he couldn't be sure whether she was still safe. After all, this village was far too strange. Especially the forest behind the mountain, where a narrow path led inside. Up to now, they hadn't set foot there at all. They suspected it was the forbidden zone of this blood gate, far more dangerous than anywhere else. Approaching it recklessly could easily lead to unimaginable consequences. Bro, where do you think Sister Alice went? Eric Church asked. Faced with the question, Chris Hemsworth could only shake his head. What exactly Alice Englert had discovered last night that drove her to act alone? Wait. We still have time. Don't rush. Right now, the most important thing is to stay calm. Once panic sets in, mistakes are inevitable. Eric Church nodded. But they waited the entire day. By the time night fell, there was still no news of Alice Englert. This time, it wasn't just Eric Church, even the other three couldn't sit still anymore. What? Alice Englert has gone missing too? The bespectacled man exclaimed in alarm. That morning, they had also discovered that someone else was missing from their group. Jenny. She had disappeared since morning as well. But because Chris Hemsworth and Eric Church were focused on worrying about Alice Englert, they hadn't noticed. The two groups hadn't contacted each other either. Only in the evening did they realize that two people had gone missing overnight. So, could it be that Sister Alice left together with Jenny? Chris Hemsworth asked. Chris Hemsworth nodded. Very likely. Then, are we doing anything tonight? The bespectacled man looked uneasy, his face pale. Their time was running out. We don't have any protective ghost artifacts. Acting at night is too dangerous. We'll wait until morning. After some thought, Chris Hemsworth decided not to move at night. In the previous Blood Gate, they had acted at night only because the rules had given clear hints. Alice Englert herself had said that unless it was a special situation, it was best not to go out at night. The world inside the Blood Gate was extremely dangerous. Everyone checked their rooms again, confirmed there were no wooden plaques, and then locked their rooms. Chris Hemsworth quietly slipped out of his own and went back to Alice Englert's room. During the day, his search had been rather cursory. There were many places he hadn't examined closely. After a full day of thinking, Chris Hemsworth felt that with Alice Englert's cautious nature, even if she acted alone, she would leave clues behind for them. So that night, he returned to her room once more. This time, he found a cracked bronze mirror, stained with patches of dried blood, hidden beneath her pillow. Chris Hemsworth was no stranger to this mirror. Back at the Uncrying Well, when Eric Church had nearly been dragged away by the ghost beneath the well, it was Alice Englert who had used this very mirror to save him. She deliberately left a ghost artifact for us. Does that mean she already knew she might meet with misfortune? Holding the mirror, Chris Hemsworth stood in Alice Englert's room, staring at the reflection, and suddenly froze. Although it was already night, the moonlight outside the window was bright. Even without turning on the light, he could clearly see the figure in the cracked bronze mirror. It wasn't him. It was a woman in wedding clothes, her hair disheveled. The sight was deeply unsettling, yet Chris Hemsworth knew the woman in the mirror wouldn't harm him. This mirror still has spiritual power. It hasn't been sealed, which means Alice Englert is still alive. In Chris Hemsworth's eyes. Aside from the mysterious letter he had received earlier, he himself didn't want Alice Englert to die in this Blood Gate. After all, it was Alice Englert who had led them into this blood gate. The dangerous burden should have been borne by the two of them. Chris Hemsworth hated owing anyone anything. Maybe I'll wait until morning. Even with the bronze mirror's protection, it's still best not to go out at night. Chris Hemsworth returned to his room and lay down to rest. He couldn't put his mind at ease, constantly worrying about Alice Englert's safety. That second mysterious letter had said that Alice Englert could not die in this blood gate. If something truly happened to her, what then? Although he didn't know who had sent him that letter, Chris Hemsworth could feel that the sender meant him no harm, at least for the time being. Otherwise, he wouldn't have survived the first blood gate at all. He lay in bed, unable to fall asleep. Half awake, half dreaming, until dawn finally arrived. Morning sunlight streamed into the room. Chris Hemsworth sat up wearily, splashed his face with water, and went to wake the others. "Bro, where are we going today?" Eric Church asked, his voice full of trust in Chris Hemsworth. "I thought about it all night. Alice Englert could only have gone to two places. First, the forest behind the mountain. Second, the home of the spirit medium Nguyen. The forest is too dangerous. We should find a way to the medium's house first." The bespectacled man frowned. "But that medium isn't someone to mess with. If she notices us, we'll be in serious trouble." Chris Hemsworth nodded. "Going in directly won't work. We'll have to find a way to lure her out first." Chapter 40, Kai Vu Village, the Head Jar. At around 9 in the morning, the three of them slipped quietly into the village. Just like the last time Chris Hemsworth and the others had entered, the villagers' gazes followed them with scrutiny and guilt. Precisely because of that guilt, not a single villager dared to face them directly. Whenever eyes met, the villagers immediately turned away, pretending to continue whatever work they were doing. Chris Hemsworth knew these villagers were on the same side as the medium. Otherwise, the medium could not have rushed to Milan's house so quickly the previous afternoon. Someone must have tipped her off. Sure enough. From their ambush near the medium's house, Chris Hemsworth and Eric Church saw a villager in coarse linen clothes dash out of the village gate and run toward a large estate beside the temple on the western side of the village. This estate was even larger than the temple itself. Two exquisitely carved stone lions stood at the main gate, their expressions ferocious. Not long after, that villager emerged from the main gate together with the medium, and the two of them hurried back into the village. Chris Hemsworth felt that the medium's back looked even more hunched than before, her steps no longer as steady. Only after confirming that they had gone far away did Chris Hemsworth and Eric Church sneak into the medium's house. The moment they stepped inside, a faint chill washed over them, accompanied by an unpleasant stench in the air. Chris Hemsworth had smelled this odor on the medium before. It was hard to describe, something like rot, yet also like a chaotic mixture of many things. The medium's house was very large. Standing in the courtyard, Chris Hemsworth scanned the surroundings and whispered. "They can't stall for us very long. Split up and search." Eric Church nodded. Chris Hemsworth went left. Eric Church went where the medium usually stayed, but found almost nothing. Just a bunch of ghost-suppressing talismans and some incomprehensible Buddhist scriptures. 10 minutes later, Eric Church stood before Chris Hemsworth, hands on his hips, panting. Anxiety crept into his heart. His eyes flicked toward the main gate from time to time, as if afraid someone might walk in. Damn. I haven't felt this nervous in ages. The last time was 11 years ago, when I stole my Marshall uncle's liquor. Chris Hemsworth remained silent. Just as he was considering whether they should leave, his gaze suddenly caught on something in a corner of the courtyard. It was a blind spot in the southwest corner of the garden. Hidden among overgrown weeds, it looked at first glance like nothing more than a storage shed for trash and miscellaneous items. "Check that room." Chris Hemsworth pointed. They immediately moved to the outside of this inconspicuous little room. Unlike the others, this room was locked. "Huh, That's strange. She's usually the only one here. Dark room were 3 rows of shelves, each lined with large glass jars. And inside those jars, human heads. The heads were soaked in a strange liquid, eyes wide open, staring straight at the 2 intruders. Damn it. Eric Church's legs began trembling uncontrollably again. Wait. Chris Hemsworth carefully examined the heads in the jars, then suddenly spoke in a horrified whisper. These heads, they're all still alive. Eric Church's eyes bulged. What? Chris Hemsworth's face darkened, a chill spreading over his body. He couldn't comprehend what he was seeing. These heads had clearly been severed from their bodies, how could they still be alive? Yet there they were, submerged in the jars, blinking. Some of them were even speaking. It hurt so much. Wah, take me away, it's so dark here, where is this? Is there anyone to save us? Is there any kind soul who can save us? The eerie cries and sobs echoed endlessly through the dark room, pounding mercilessly against the hearts of the 2 men. Bro, turn off the light, now. Eric Church seemed to realize something and shouted. But Chris Hemsworth raised a hand, signaling him to be quiet. Shoo. Seeing Chris Hemsworth's grave expression, Eric Church shut his mouth. Listening intently, Chris Hemsworth walked to a corner of the room, lifted a cloth covering something, and pulled out a newly placed glass jar. At the sight of this jar, Eric Church's eyes widened, words failing him. Because inside the jar, the human head was Alice Englert.